Welcome everyone to this morning's session on teaching archives and archivists. My name's Richard Lehane. I'm an archivist at State Archives, New South Wales. And we've got two halves to this morning's session, teaching archives to particularly to university students, and then also from an archival educator teaching archivists. So to begin with, we have 4 archivists working in university contexts: David Tredinnick from Deakin, Gionni de Gravio and Anne Hardy, both from the University of Newcastle, and Katie Wood from the University of Melbourne Archives. And they'll be speaking on the theme of outreach to students within universities, and then also to the wider community. And to commence that session, I'd like to invite David Tredinnick from Deakin.
I'm going to open the session with a very brief but by no means comprehensive overview of the relationship between Australian university archives and their academic colleagues, followed by a rundown of what we're doing currently at Deakin. And then after I'm done, then Anne and Gionni, they're going to talk about the amazing projects that are taking place at Newcastle. And then Katie's going to finish with a view from UniMelb Archives, who are old hands in this area. I should stress before we begin that the focus of our presentation's not on the relationship between university archives and archival training programs per se, but it's rather on how archival collections can be utilised more effectively in teaching and learning across multiple disciplines in the university. So, Deakin. So initially, and I'm a newbie to this area, to archives and teaching and learning, and archives more generally. So faced with the task of enticing young people with old stuff, like all great pioneers, I set out to find what other people were doing. And my findings became the basis of a paper which you can find here. But I'll just give you a potted summary before I go on to what we're doing at Deakin now. University archives are finding themselves increasingly drawn to teaching and learning, often driven by the survival instinct, and to prove their continued relevance to the institution which provides them with wages and resources. However, enticing academics away from rolling out their well-structured and well-worn course content to include hands-on, on-site archival research, it's been described as a sort of dance, as an awkward shimmy back and forth between, so what do you have? And so what do you want? You can find yourself begging, almost pleading to relieve an overworked academic of a couple of hours teaching. To even get to first base, archives teams have to abandon their traditionally passive role and promote archival opportunities with passion, persistence, and at the risk of sounding like our current Prime Minister, innovation. I even stooped last year to doing a presentation for the Arts and Ed faculty, which was entitled Embracing the Naked Archivist. But then I have no shame at all. One takeaway from my forays into this area over the last 12 months is what's important is you have to forego the normal relationships that you have within the university and work collaboratively and horizontally across the university to get these kinds of programs up. And you need to just forget about the traditional vertical hierarchies or you just get nowhere in this area. So apart from records documenting Deakin's development from its beginnings as a 70s pipe dream of being Victoria's 4th university to the multi-campus behemoth it's become now, we hold records at Deakin of its dozen or so antecedent institutions. Many of these were teachers' colleges. You can see some pictures there. And so one of our collecting strengths is the development of Victorian teacher training methods from the post-war period onwards. And as a pioneer of campus education, we also have an overwhelming collection of audiovisual material in various formats that was created for distance learning. Personally, I believe that we should be encouraging the university to be holding a mirror up to itself and to make itself the unflinching subject of scholarly pursuit by students and researchers alike. And with the obvious informational embargoes in place, there's still a wealth of material there which would benefit multiple disciplines. However, with an eye to creating attractive teaching and learning opportunities, at Deakin we've had to broaden our collecting scope to include donations which may have no direct connection to the university, yet they could be of potential interest to particular academic cohorts. To avoid the danger of collecting the world, though, these donations have only been accepted after we've sought approval from teaching staff. As a result, over the last year or so, we've acquired collections such as the papers of the Football Federation of Victoria. Why? Because Deakin's a national leader in sports science, sports management and sports history. We've got an amazing collection of photographs in this acquisition, which I'd love to show you, but I can't for obvious reasons. But we've also acquired a collection of nursing and surgical implements from Southwest Health in Warrnambool, and I can show you some of these. Again, why? Because Deakin's Nursing School, its allied health service streams and the School of Medicine, they all continue to grow. So we will continue to pester the academics responsible for making us accept these collections until they use them as course material. So what are we doing now? Up until now, besides regularly hosting practicum students from postgraduate archives and records courses, until this year we haven't really attempted much. But in 2017, we've begun to dip our toes into the stream. As a team of two, however, our foray into student-centred learning has made somewhat of a dent on our BAU activities, but we are all the wiser and happier for it, aren't we, Anthony? So this year, we kicked off in a relatively safe space, fairly traditional space for archives, collaborating with the Cultural Heritage and Museum Studies School in trimester 1, and we presented a seminar on virtual archives for students enrolled in their virtual history unit. So both in the seminar and as well as in an end of unit case study, the focus of our presentation was on our own successes and failures and bold missteps in this particular field. And then in the end of trimester case study, we aligned practical examples from our recent stumbles into the virtual arena with the unit's weekly topics. And then in trimester 2, which we're just coming to the end of, we launched 2 internship programs, one paid, the other not so paid, each also providing students with course credit. And both internship programs were created with the assistance of the university's Workplace Integrated Learning team, or WIL team. The first project, called Deakin in 9 Objects, was developed in collaboration with a number of Deakin-based stakeholders who are working in the collections area across the university. And the aim of this project is to pair a postgraduate student from Cultural Heritage and Museum Studies with a third-year student from Film, TV and Animation. And together, they work on producing short films inspired by artefacts from our various collections. Of course, it's a shameless rip-off of the British Museum's History of the World in 100 Objects, but we won't go there. This trimester, we've got a team working with us in archives, and we've got another team working in the gallery space. And then in trimester 1 next year, we hope to have our third and final team working in the Alfred Deakin Prime Ministerial Library. Now, this is a paid gig, which is why they're smiling. This is our archives team. This is Marion and Pravin, who I love dearly. They have 3 objects to work on. They have a pneumatic tape, they have a building, and they have a person. And as you can imagine, each artefact requires very different appraisal skills and requires a very different creative response. So the hope was, and this has been borne out to be a success over the course of a trimester, that the cultural heritage student is going to encourage the film and TV student to see the benefits of using research material in their work, and that the film and TV student is going to help their team member explore audio-visual responses to heritage issues. So their achievements and those of the gallery team are being documented in a Deakin in 9 Objects WordPress site and blog. And with only like all 9 films, they're going to be showcased in October next year, which is the 40th anniversary of Deakin's first graduation ceremony. And this afternoon, I'm getting to see their rough edits of their 3 films, so I'm very excited by that. Our other unpaid but equally hardworking intern is working with Anthony Catrice, the university archivist, on the Allambie site project. Our Burwood-based collection is held in buildings that used to belong to the Allambie Reception Centre, which was a children's home which operated from the 60s up until the early 90s. So our intern Louise is assisting Anthony with a reunion for care leavers that's going to be held in the original buildings in a couple of weeks' time. And she's also putting together a really detailed website with information about the buildings and also the history of Allambie. So these images and the data for the site's been gathered from our archive, as well as collections at Prov, the Uniting Synod, the Wesley Mission and Whitehorse Council. So looking ahead, there's another project that it's just begun, it's very early stages. We're working with Offstage, the online performance database, Flinders University and the University of Queensland at this stage, to build 3D renders of architectural spaces that have been used by Deakin-funded performing arts companies. So this includes the Mill Theatre, which was operating in the late 70s and the early 80s, and Back-to-Back Theatre, which Deakin has a relationship with. So the foundations of these 3D renders, they're mostly drawn from plans and photographs and performance footage which we have in our collection. And then once complete, with the assistance of some fancy pants augmented reality, these virtual spaces, we don't know what we're going to use them for, but they could be the site for future exhibitions that students can set up, performances, recreating performances, or potentially we could have students creating projects collaboratively from remote locations. We don't know. This was my meeting last Sunday, by the way, in De Graves. So we're just at the beginning of this particular journey, so it's a matter of watch this space, or better still, watch their space, these people who are going to speak next, because they're already much further down the path than we are at Deakin. Thank you.
Thank you. Great honour to be here today for you. I'm the Italian, so I'm going to be walking around, and Anne's is very more stable than I am. But we'll just show you what we've done. This is like a sequel to last year's presentation, where we delivered almost like a wish of what we would like to see happen, and that we would report on what actually happened during the course of the year about about our initiatives in this space with bringing young people into the world of archives, okay? So we're trying to find ways of bridging the gap between students and what we do. And so just to recap, I had the Sex and Scandal class change my life last year because they came and visited us in the archive. They were really turned on people. They asked some great questions, and like all archivists, I gave them a nice little whinge fest on how there's just so many things here and I haven't got enough life in me left to do anything, and I need an army of young people to help me. And their lecturer, who was Professor Marguerite Johnson, there she is there, came up to me afterwards and said, this is exactly what we're trying to build into the new BA, work integrated learning opportunities that would bring young people into all these wonderful professions across this thing called the GLAM sector, okay, which involves galleries, libraries, archives and museums. So through the Australian Society of Archivists, I'm a representative on the GLAM Peak along with Sue, and I was just hearing some really inspiring things, and I wanted to apply them at Newcastle because I thought, well, we've got some wonderful history here, we've got some wonderful young people, and their heritage is basically what I deal with every day. So it's not just mine to deal with, it's a shared responsibility with the communities we live in. Every month we have like a group of these people here, which are they're mostly over the age of 50. The Hunter Living Histories group, so they're historians, they're business people, academics, and this is where we get the feel of what the community wants over the next year. So there might be commemorative events, or we do a bit of a mind to see what the community's hungering after. So in answer to those questions about digitisation, what do you digitise? You just don't start at one end of the archive and digitise a whole lot. We see it as a gigantic forest and ecosystem of human expression, and we see what's ailing the community we're in and what they need. So we digitise what the community needs in order to help it understand itself or understand an argument that it's dealing with, or it might be wanting to celebrate an achievement. So it's those sorts of things that we get out of the community, and what we've been missing is the connection with our students into this sort of space.
And I'll just add that I guess this is a pilot project, so the GLAM Digitisation Lab was an idea last year. It has come to fruition with support from across different sectors of the university. That was a big step. So we were fortunate that the Faculty of Education and Arts, IT Services, a really good innovation team that had been based in the Chancellery, moved into the library. We find the dynamics and the networking that goes on with that team.
So they were 4 young guys who were born in the 70s. So when I talked to them about GLAM, they just looked at me blankly. They said, what does this mean? And I gave them the acronym. And then I said, but have you heard of Gary Glitter, Alvin Stardust, T-Rex, blank, looks back, you know? So after I did a few renditions of My Cougar Chew, they finally understood that it was pretty cool sort of music, and this was the sort of thing that we were trying to engender into this space because it's such a beautiful sort of a look. I mean, this sort of glam thing to me, I just see glitter and platforms because I lived through that era, I guess. And I see mirror balls too. So we did manage to whack the first mirror ball in the world in an archive. So the first archival mirror ball ever installed in a library or an archive space was installed at the University of Newcastle. Let the record show that. And it's fun because when the students come down, all the school kids, almost you can hear them hopping down the stairs. They get into that space with the mirror ball and they're just magic. It's just magic.
So the model of the project is very multidisciplinary, so it's a little bit different to David's description of what they're doing, in that it's course orientated around cultural heritage. This is very multidisciplinary, so we've got the lab set up for 10 spaces. Since January we've had 14 work integrated learning students. The majority are from humanities, but they'll be either majoring in creative writing, history, geography. We've had natural history illustration students, our first communication student, sociology student. Some of them have gone on to continue volunteering, which is good, so they've really become quite engaged. So it's been a busy year with those 14 students on 80-hour practicums. So it's a space where they can learn a whole range of skills, from cultural heritage skills, the assessment of cultural sources, really understand the context of collections and artefacts they're working in. So over the 80 hours, it's not just a learning and education space, but it is a practical, a workspace. So they're working in an archive. The GlamX lab is an add-on from the cultural collections. We're physically in a different space of the library, but I think there's that connectedness that they're really getting to understand the whole gamut of an artefact when it comes into the cultural collections, a whole range of different projects. So separate to the GlamX lab, or within the GlamX lab, there's also a digitisation space for audiovisual material. So that's the NBN television archive that has recently moved into a purpose space, and we're still negotiating with other institutions that hold this material, because the importance of having it digitised is, it's quite urgent. We've got mentors, former staff of NBN television, so they're mentoring our student that's just finished this week. So that's that nice sort of collaboration between the community. The third space we have is specifically for 3D digitisation. So the second semester of this year we haven't officially launched, but we've started on quite a complex and lengthy project, and it's called the Deep Time Project. That's just an image of Phil Lloyd, one of the former NBN television staff, who comes in weekly, and he's encouraging some other former staff to, as they retire, to come in and teach their skills of all the different formats of digitisation. So
Phil was like the de facto archivist of NBN. He'd been doing this on a voluntary basis because he knew that their magnetic tape had a time limit, and these machines that he was looking after had time limits as well. And so NBN had sold the building, and I said to him, "Why don't you move you and everything, all your machines, into the library?" We didn't have a room at the time. I was just wishful thinking. But that, that's the power of this sparkly thing called Glam X that we've called it. To me, it's like a Trojan horse. I can move an elephant into the library, okay, and then they'll go there and they'll say, "Look, the elephant needs to be fed." And all of a sudden, well, why haven't we got any food for the elephant? Let's go and feed it, So it's one of these things whereby you can expand the breadth, because our breadth for this was that, how about we deal with human expression in all its forms in our own Hunter region across 50,000 years. So that encompasses all Aboriginal records in the field, which I think of as archives in the field, Aboriginal artefacts that come out of Aboriginal digs, those things that we've had in collections, as well as audiovisual and all the other things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. This was the artefact atelier, almost like a workshop. This was the artefacts that were gathered from the Palais Royal Guild. So what they did in Newcastle is they built a KFC restaurant over the top of a 6,500-year-old site. And the artefacts, we dealt with the 4 traditional owner groups that had worked on that site, decided to deposit them with us. And when the Marguerite came through, she basically was our champion. And within a week, we got an interview to talk to the VC about what we wanted to do. And she just ticked the box and thought, this is a great idea. When we saw these 4 guys who I told you before, or the 5 guys from the innovation team, they were young blokes with great ideas. We talked innovation projects. So we said, how are we going to, what are our pilot projects going to be? And one was to actually gather some material to actually, or gather the machines to actually 3D scan these artefacts. And the other thing was to try and embed them in a dig, a virtual dig. So that to me was just magical at the time. I didn't know whether that was going to happen, but...
We can probably add here, because the 6,500 artefacts, a lot of them are really so small. This is the size of the scanner here, so we're scanning at the moment some of the larger ones in consultation with Aboriginal people and students. The smaller ones, we have a natural history illustration student on a project sketching the real small ones that we hope to scan and have uploaded on our digital Living Histories platform. Also the 3D artefacts, as they're scanned, they'll also be uploaded on our digital platform. So it will then cover, like we'll have our digital photographs, audio, but people will be able to get online and actually have a look at any artefacts and move them around within the digital platform. So the first half of the year, the projects were very tailored, specific small projects. Because the lab came about so fast, we just had to tailor them to what the student could do, what they were interested in. We've got to be mindful that we have to think of them as workers, as be staff within an archive, and not turn into their supervisor if they get sort of quite thrown into a particular area that they've got a passion for, to sort of pull them back but make sure they're focused on digitising and what our core business is. Just some of the people that have been on placement over the semester. And the NBN archive, different levels of skill.
So Justin was a member of the original Sex and Scandal group. So he tweeted me the other day. I said, well, you're a hero because that's all come about out of that class visit.
It's a deep time project.
Yeah, so this is what they were able to create for us, which is just absolutely amazing. I mean, these artefact scans go into our digital platform, much like our digital catalogue. And then this innovation team, because again, it was just a fluke. Having people close to you is really handy, because when the Recollect data platform people were with us, I just ran up the stairs and grabbed the innovation team down the stairs and to meet this fella, Tyler, and together they just talked geek talk, okay, in terms of what we wanted to do in terms of three-dimensional ideas. And this deep time thing that they were able to do was actually drag, once we scan these objects and put it into the digital platform, they then feed off into this 3D thing. And I thought, oh my God, that's fantastic, because it can really be applied to anything that you put into a database or some sort of digital platform, can be farmed out into any representation. So the thing is, for me, it's not so much the digitisation. If we aren't digitising now, well then let's just get over it. Get the stuff out there, because the real action is not in what digitised things we are prepared to share with the community. The real action is happening in how the canvas that all this stuff will come together to the user will be. That's where the real action is. And that, my dear friends, we have no control over. That is something which is the exciting next instalment of what people do with this stuff. Getting it into context was just incredible, because when we had a look at the archaeological dig itself, the archaeologists seem to have done a beautiful job of getting the artefacts out of the ground in meticulous original order. And then when we had a look at what we got in the boxes, what they'd done is that they then took that original order and extracted all the scrapers into one box, all the cores into another, all this into another. So they divided everything, according to Archives Talk, into series. And just so when we were scanning it, I said to Anne, how's it going? She said, this is great, but I don't know how we're going to find them again, because it just seems to me to be in chaos. So across a course of a week, I just had all these artefacts, 5,500 of them over a table, and every night at about 2 o'clock in the morning, I'd be woken up. And there'd be a bit of advice that would come through about how to handle this thing. So the first would be getting a map of the entire dig and working out that the spits were the depths. And basically, across that course of a week, I restored that dig to original order. The original order of the dig, okay? That's how an archivist can help an archaeologist, okay? And then across the time, we were able then to locate the deepest parts of that dig. So that dig went from 1,933 years, because someone with a bulldozer accidentally destroyed 1,933 years of history by excavating in the wrong place at the wrong time. So from 1,933 years all the way to 6,715 years. So when we found the deepest part of that dig, which was Spit 20, we contacted our Aboriginal student that was volunteering with us, Jason, and I said to him, Jason, I want you to scan these objects. as, you know, just because that would be just fantastic. And he said, that's wonderful, great honour, I'll do it in honour of my grandfather. And I thought to myself, well, this is where this technology connects on an emotional level with people. Now, this dig is covered over by a KFC site. It's no longer accessible, but with technology, we can inform people about it. When we grab these objects in three-dimensional space, all that metadata about that object appears. We've got a light that we can focus on it, as Anne was showing you in the previous slide. And then when we're finished with the object, we just throw it back and it goes back into the original order. Isn't that a fantastic way of accessing an archive?
With, of course, cultural awareness, and we're in regular contact and consultation with the School of Wallatuka, but it's an exciting project for students. And some of the challenges and barriers is just the setting up of the workspace and make sure all the technology is working, and to negotiate the challenges across disciplines, because it's a new concept in the library. It was how do we reach out to academics and other courses that run practicums, and for them to sort of understand where other disciplines do have a place in the archive, and to be creative and thinking about different projects and working in teams. So look, overall, there haven't been too many challenges. Our last challenge was probably with the communications.
The branding. You know, because what we wanted to do is, when all the students completed, we wanted to give them a Glam X T-shirt, and then we had a temporary design. It went up the university tree, and it stayed there since May. Returned 1 week before we had to deliver this presentation. That the Style Council of the University of Newcastle said it's off-brand. Sorry. And they sent me back this T-shirt with Glam X, and it just looked like an IT shirt. And I just hit the roof, and I sent out an inappropriate email.
To the VC.
To the VC and to the joint. It was to the inner circle of the people that were close to this concept. I said, I'm not putting one of our students in this IT shirt. You're sending our students out into the world saying, we get paid $3 an hour, we're not worth it, we're in a slave job. No, I want our students to have a sparkly, beautiful Glam X shirt that shines, that makes them look attractive. I said the design that they sent back did not arouse us. I said it was not sexy, it was passionless, it was gutless, i.e. not courageous. And then I pleaded with the VC, my dear Caroline, my dear John, please save us from brand death. So next thing that happened was that I was sent up the office to get my bum kicked. And while we were there saying, you have sent an inappropriate email, I said, sometimes you have to send inappropriate emails. We're living in the age of Trump, and all the most wonderful words do not achieve anything anymore. You know, sometimes it's important to send an inappropriate email to achieve appropriate ends. And, you know, they were saying to me, the VC will not deal with this. I said, how do you know? How do you know the VC isn't dealing with this right now as we speak? And anyway, I said, look, if I've done something wrong, suspend me, send me home, it'll be fine. And anyway, they laughed and had a giggle. I said, I've never sent you in a wrong path. This thing is something that we really believe in. We're stitching together with sticks and twigs because we're Newcastle. All these computers that you see up there were sort of second-hand computers. The rooms just got retrofitted as we went. So we've just done what we can with what we've got. I mean, this is not big funding of anything, okay? Anyway, when I got the reply back from the guy from marketing, he goes, okay, because the email had been sent on to him from the VC at the very moment that I was getting my bum kicked. So she was dealing with it. And he said, here's a compromise, if you must persist. He said, how about we put your Glam X thing on the back of the shirt and we put the university logo stuff on the front? And I said, and then at the end of the email he said, I must say to you that your email was highly inappropriate. It's terrible how you do this, you're in blah, 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 blah. I wrote back, I said, thank you very much, that's a fantastic compromise, but can we do the absolute reverse? Can we put the Glam X logo on the front of the T-shirt and the university thing on the back? By Saturday morning, the white flag had gone up. Fine. So, That's one small step from us. That's a gigantic step against brand police, I tell you. But I mean, this is then the ideas that we've been wanting to do, you know. So anyway, sorry, might have gone over time.
I'm glad you did, Gionni. I've never thought about sparkly T-shirts for our teaching program. Hi, I'm Katie. I'm from the University of Melbourne Archives, and I'm going to be talking about our teaching program. In 2011, we decided to develop a teaching and learning program encouraging the use of archival material in university courses for two main reasons and one third reason. The third reason is that I'm a graduate of history here at the university. I did my entire undergraduate degree without ever even knowing that there was an archive here. And so I'm somewhat evangelical about the use or about introducing undergraduate students to our archives. The official reasons. As David said, in a period of long-term strain of funding resources for university libraries, proving our value and worth to the university is crucial. In 2011, we were only involved in one history class a year, so clearly university academics didn't see us and the collection that we look after as a teaching and learning resource. But if we could engage in that space more, it's an argument for the resources that the university puts into the archives as we provide a service to academics and an experience to students, which is crucial for the university. But the other second reason was that we felt that a teaching program would feed into an increase in our researcher use as well. And I believe that introducing undergraduate students to our collection, and hopefully multiple times throughout their degree, would encourage those that go on to do postgraduate research to use our collections as a basis for that research. And that's something that has certainly happened since 2011 when we began. And it's wonderful to see the undergraduates that you first meet in our classes coming to us to ask about what kind of resources they could use in their honours or their masters or their PhD research. And in fact, the academics that we've been involved in the program have also been using the material that we find for them in research projects. In 2011, when we decided to run with this program, the first thing we did was start cold calling academics. We went through the university handbook to identify courses that related to our collections, and then we contacted the lecturers just to say, this is what we've got, are you interested in using it in your courses? We contacted about 20 academics. We had 2 responses. And so the first year we had 2 classes with 65 students. That was 2012. We've started being involved in seminars across the university, seminars, conferences and so on. Anytime the university wants to get a few people together to talk about teaching at the university, we try to be involved to say, have you thought about using the collections here in your classes to get the word out? So by 2013, we had 10 classes with 275 students, and then I got the figures for this year. We've had 25 classes with 659 undergraduate students, 119 postgraduates, and 48 external students from other courses. And that work has been with myself, my colleagues Jane Beattie and Sophie Garrett as our teaching team. Our basic framework, as you get a sense of from the photographs, is a document analysis exercise, essentially, based on the themes of the course. And we've done that for subjects that include not just history, but also sociology, criminology, architecture, Indigenous studies, legal studies, and languages as well. Languages is a big area for us. We've also tried to be a bit more creative as well. We've had some exercises. There's some students spelling out semaphore code as an exercise in their class. We've had students writing blogs, online exhibitions, real-life exhibitions, and so on. And I think one of the themes from the keynote yesterday was the way in which the archive can be used as a basis for dialogue. And obviously, in our classes, it's not the same sort of dialogue that we're talking about, but in essence, that kind of process is very similar. I think archival material can really bring the grand events of history down to the personal level, and we found that they teach students that the actions of so-called ordinary people in those times can be of interest themselves, and in that sense they engage with the historical events or the sociological themes that they're learning about in a much more kind of personal way. And to give you some examples, one of the classes that we had, we were looking at correspondence to Malcolm Fraser at the time that the opposition were withholding supply in 1975 from the Whitlam government, and the letters were both to and against what Fraser was doing. And at the end of the classes, the students started talking about how they wanted to write letters to their own MPs about what they were doing and what they thought about the politics of the day. We had a Spanish language class that was looking at material from Australians who fought in the international brigades in the Spanish Civil War that happened just a week after the Charlottesville events in America. And the students, of course, were talking about how do you respond to the rise of fascist and far-right organisations. And one of my favourites is this picture here of some students who were had done some research. They'd chosen the topic themselves of our collection. Zelda Deprano, who's a unionist and feminist, essential in winning equal pay for women in the early 70s. And they, at the end of their course, they'd had an exhibition showcasing their work, and we surprised them with Zelda Deprano attending, and they just loved it. But I think the two areas that we want to develop further, so we want to offer the academic community and the university a deeper engagement in archives than even that kind of document analysis can provide. And there's two ways that we can do that. I think the first is to incorporate vocational skills in our object-based learning, and the second is to incorporate better discussions of archival theory and practice. So although a big part of teaching with archival material is introducing students to that tactile, or the experience of tactile learning, it's also important for the University of Melbourne Archives to develop ways of incorporating practical and digital skills into our classes. And the university, it's a sign of the increasing corporatisation of universities that they're focusing on things like employability. But I think that there is something very positive that we can get out of that if we can incorporate object-based learning or archival studies with those kind of vocational skills. So we run a few classes where students do things like they write blog posts as part of their assignment. We have a digital humanities class that follows the process of digitisation from the selection of material to the creation of the metadata to the scanning to then presenting it online somehow. And a history capstone class, so that's sort of later, sort of third year undergraduates who use Omeka, which is an open source platform for a digital repository basically, and they use that to create an online exhibition. In my opinion, ideally, and we'll see if anyone listens, I'm just putting it out there, is that all first year social science students should be required to do a research methods and presentation course that would incorporate primary source research, understanding archival methods and basic digital literacy such as data management and basic coding for blogs and websites. And that partly comes out of my experience, as I said, doing an undergraduate degree here, and then it was only when I went to do my information information management course at RMIT that I learnt the skills that would be necessary if I wanted to move into any field to do with historical inquiry. Placing object-based learning, as we call it here, or teaching with archives elsewhere, in connection to that practical vocational skills, grounds us in a key concern of the university currently, and ensures that we're central to the undergraduate experience and not just a sort of boutique service, which I worry that we might be a bit at the moment. The second thing that I wanted to point to that we want to work more on is the growth of archival studies as a distinct intellectual field really shown us that there's something important that we archivists can contribute to the intellectual life of the campus. And I'm talking about campuses that don't have archival studies programs. As numerous studies have discussed recently, the archival turn in many social sciences has happened with little input from archivists. And I think in this sense, Michelle Caswell's recent article, The Archive is Not an Archives, on acknowledging the intellectual contribution of archival studies is really a bit of a call to arms for us. And she speaks mostly about the role that archival studies academics can play, but I think the teaching and learning programs within university archives are one way that we practitioners can engage with academics outside of our discipline and teach students about the history, theory and practice of creating, collecting and maintaining archives. I'd like to be able to say that we can train the next generation of social scientists at this university in a deeper understanding of the nature and history of record keeping in society. If we want there to be an archival turn in our faculties, we university archivists are in a good position to ensure that that happens with input from archivists. And we've begun to do this in a number of courses, in particular in sociology and history. But I think that what we need to do is be a bit more forthright about the input that we can have, not just on the practical aspects and the exercises in the classes, but also the theoretical underpinnings of the courses that we're involved in. And it's important for us, I think, to have the preparation time to engage in those theoretical themes to see where we might fit in. So that's our teaching program, and it's bringing, I think, a new generation into the archives, and it showed them both the joys and the frustrations involved in primary source research. And I think this is particularly important for a generation that, as we know, seems to think that everything is available on Google. But of course, there's always plenty more to do. Thanks.
Before moving on to Leisa, we've got time for questions. If anyone would like to ask a question of any of our three speakers or of all of them.
Thank you for an interesting presentation. My name's Nicole Gammy. I presented it late yesterday afternoon on some other stuff, a bit related to some of what you're talking about. I had a question in relation to, there seems to be a lot of focus on involving archives in, I guess, some of the social sciences and those sorts of things. What about some of the more pure sciences and medicine? Do you have any programs involving students in those sort of areas?
Because ours has only just started as a pilot program this year, we started off slow and it's just taken a little bit of time to network, but I think of creative ways of engaging students from science, medicine and engaging with sort of pharmaceutical records we have. If there's any sort of research that could be done, analysis. We've actually...
The nearest thing that came to that was pharmacy records. We were in contact with pharmacists that were very interested in unlocking pharmacy records, but that involves another level of digitisation, which they refer to as scientific digitisation, which is basically extracting that data and putting it into spreadsheets and understanding what ailed the community and what they were being prescribed across a particular time. I mean, that would be fantastic to involve our students in that, but we've sort of really concentrated on the humanities at the moment. They've been the immediate things, been the easiest. We have had other sort of scientific related things like weather records that we've had, and we've had crowdsourced digitisation of those into spreadsheets and then analysis by climate scientists. But that's an area we'd love to expand in. But for now, we're just connecting with the arts and humanities, and hopefully we'll get the sciences on board as well.
I've started having a conversation with the head of teaching at the School of Medicine around some of the artefacts, other objects apart from the ones that I showed you earlier. And there's genuine interest in involving medical artefacts in their teaching and learning strategies, but it's, as I said in my talk, it's sort of getting them to kind of open up their curriculum to include anything that involves the past rather than thinking about what's to come is really tricky, but I'm still bludgeoning away eventually.
My question was essentially the same as the question that's just been asked. I think the current emphasis on STEM describes a really big possibility for in-house archives. Yep.
Well, this STEM and cable thing, I mean, part of the vision of this GlamX dream that I had was that, we wanted this sort of launch. When we finally do this launch, I want it to be as slick as the launch of a new iPhone, okay? And at the end, these two words, STEM and cable, which artificially divide the arts and sciences, I wanted them to form one word, whatever, or one symbol, because they shouldn't be separated. This is an artificial nonsense.
Just taking this a bit further as well in terms of the skills and opportunities that we can be providing to students. I thought Tim Sherritt's presentation at the last ASA conference in Parramatta was really illuminating in that regard. We do have a shortage of students with skills with Python and JavaScript, and the really interesting projects that can be developed, I think, with quite good career possibilities for students, often use those kinds of skills. I'd mentioned database and SQL as well, so I'm really supporting the work of the comments of the previous speaker in that regard. I think we need to broaden our effort and move to engaging this current direction and emphasis in STEM and the skills that relate to that. Congratulations to all of you. You've managed to embed in teaching and learning and work integrated learning and in-house archives, and I think it's a wonderful thing to see.
Just in response to that, because one of the problems that we've had in trying to do that in our classes is the skills of the archivists who are doing the teaching. I tried to learn Python and failed, but we work with other university departments. So there's research platforms and some of those kind of IT areas, and I think that's one way that we can continue to try to bring in object-based learning with what I call vocational skills, is that it is about collaboration, because we need the IT skills and so on that we might not have ourselves, and the academics generally don't have either.
Not so much a question but a comment. It's very encouraging to see, because as you work in a school archive, we face exactly the same issues. And I would like to encourage a little bit more cross-fertilisation, because you have skills that we could definitely benefit from and could perhaps even help or use and have students that would be interested in similar projects.
I guess something that relates to that is the Living Histories group that meets once a month has been running for 10 years. So one of the things we get the work integrated learning students to do is write up something around their project, present it to the group, and it's through that and their publication that they'll get feedback, sometimes weeks, months later. And I think that's what brings in the mentors and the other disciplines. And also, I'm not technically an archivist, I'm a former social worker. So I'm used to working in multidisciplinary teams. So it's sort of like first nature for me. Working in an archive is just bringing in the knowledge, people with the right skills and the knowledge, whether it's conservation, history.
It's been the good thing about Anne is that she's applied this sort of medical thing. I mean, when you go and have an operation, you've got a whole various skill set around looking after that body, that person, all right? I don't know why archivists for the last 40 years have been off to the side over here with themselves. You know, we need to be part of multidisciplinary teams working on the patient. And the patient, my dear friends, is our world. Our world is in dire straits, and they need us in there. Okay, they need a relationship with history and the records that we hold. They need that knowledge, that wisdom. And, you know, I'm too old to learn Python. I'll never go there. But there are young people that are coming into our midst now from various disciplines that know that like that, you know, they just know this stuff. And the more it's not just us teaching them about our professions, you know, across librarianship, archives, conservation, digital platform management, data management, curatorial, whatever it is that's in that lovely thing called GLAM. It's also what they teach us, what they can do. I mean, we were doing these 3D scanning. It took us an hour to do it. One of Jason's fellow Aboriginal friends came over. He's got all this IT knowledge. In 2 seconds, he just renovated how we did 3D scanning.
And just adding to that, someone may come in with IT skills, communication skills, and once they engage with an artefact, the light bulb goes on. It's been really lovely. Some of the feedback that we've got is really positive. Half of the work integrated learning students are continuing to volunteer, and it's just really lovely to see. So I think it's that physical engagement and meaning. We also accept volunteers in the community, but you know that they've had tears in their eyes. Some of the Aboriginal students, we invite them to look and engage with the artefacts. So we sort of talk about it first, but I think for the few Aboriginal students that we have on the Deep Time project, it is making a big difference for their well-being, I think.
The thing with volunteering, I hate young people volunteering. You know, we should be building in paid positions for this, just like the industries used to have apprenticeships and traineeships that would be funded nationally or whatever it was the funding model. We need that on a cultural heritage level, okay? We need that same sort of thing. If we can roll out a national scheme, then the politicians will go for that because it's providing employment, it's providing lifelong skills, and this is all within this area, this wonderful world that we all inhabit.
Hi, Susan Kennedy, City of Sydney Archives. Firstly, thank you for a really inspiring session. I am one of a small team of 6 archivists, and we have a small promotions group, and we're always trying to make the archive visible. But you've really lit a small fire in me today to go beyond that and to have a look at our learning programs division in council and how they might, we don't have students, but how they might utilise the collection in ways that you've been showing us. So thank you very much for a really inspiring session.
Thanks again to our panel of archivists within universities. So, welcome Leisa, Dr. Leisa Gibbons to the podium. Leisa's an archival educator now working at Curtin University. In the description in our program, it describes service learning for archival education, but Leisa told me before the talk that her theme will actually be disrupting archival education.
I just want to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and the place that we are meeting today and pay respects to elders past and present. I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story about myself and some of the things that I've been up to over the last few years. I am an academic. I do the shimmy, David? Yes, and I can tell you in my experience that happens quite a lot. The notion of being overworked is quite significant. I'm going to share you today a little bit about that and how that comes about. So yes, in my abstract for today, I did the very lovely engaging expert knowledge outside of academia, service learning for archival education. And so that was, 6 months ago that I put that together. I've kind of moved on from that actually, which is why I want to talk about disrupting archival education. So there's a little bit of awareness knowing that that image is probably of a woman shouting is probably created by a man, but it's kind of how I feel a little bit around the experiences that I've had in academia. So my story is that I went to Monash University to do my master's, 2006, 2007, graduated, and I then, for some reason, decided to do a PhD. Before that, I did start work as an archivist and a records professional. During my PhD, I created a company called Rhizome Digital, where I worked with not-for-profits, community organisations, and all kinds of things. I was supporting myself. I did other contract work outside of that business. So I have quite a lot of different kinds of experiences related to records management and archives. I also worked at one point as a records manager for a social welfare organisation. So then I finished my PhD in 2015, graduated, got on a plane, went to the US. And there was quite a few reasons for this. One of them is because I'd been cultivating quite a lot of relationships with my US colleagues. They think about archives differently to the way we do. And I wanted to learn more. My PhD was on social media and how we value interactions at different levels, from creators interacting with technologies, interacting with corporate entities, interacting with communities and researchers and how they do that. So there's a lot of different understandings of how people understand value as it's evolving over time. And so the US, they think about these things differently. So the first mistake I made was that I went into a tenure track position at Kent State University. I don't know if you know too much about the US academic system, but that was not for me, I came to realise. It's not my kind of thing. I was in a big I school, eventually an I school, of about 22 faculty members. I came from an information science systems school in Monash and went to an information science school, which is kind of like a big world of difference. But anyway, I was the archival educator. So the first thing that I wanted to show you was that there is, I'm doing a little bit of research. I did some in the States, and I've come back and I'm working at Curtin now. I've been there 3 months. And I have a colleague at Curtin who is from the States teaching library students, particularly cataloguing, because they couldn't find anybody in Australia to do it. So she's from UNC, which is University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and we've started this little bit of research around what we've called educating Australia-based students to be global information professionals. And the beginning of that is to start having a look at what are the differences, what are the similarities. Now, I'm just focusing here on archives and records accrediting bodies. The significant difference is that accreditation does not occur in the States or in Canada. There is the Society of American Archivists and the Association of Canadian Archivists. They produce guidelines for graduate education. They don't accredit. Actually, in the US and Canada, what they do is have accreditation through different institutions. So this is for archives. Records, of course, there's ARMA in the States as well, and AIM, and they don't accredit either. But the Institute of Certified Records Managers, ICRM, is through ARMA, and the Academy of Certified Archivists. And these are exams that people will sit. You don't have to actually have a qualification, and you can become a certified archivist. Now, somebody done some research finding out whether or not people were hiring certified archivists and did it matter, and ultimately it didn't really matter. There is a relationship between those entities and the SAA, but well, I don't really have time to go into it now, but it's not an SAA necessarily entity. So in Australia, of course, we know we have a very strong accreditation process. The Australian Society of Archivists and the Records and Information Management Professionals of Australasia, they accredit under the Statement of Knowledge for Record Keeping Professionals. So the work that I'm going to show you a little bit about today is primarily around some of those things that came out from the GPAS, which is the guidelines from the Society of American Archivists, and the competency statements that came from the Academy of Certified Archivists and the Institute of Certified Records Managers. So, just before I tell you that, I just want to tell you a little bit of information about what we were looking at. So this is going to give you a little bit of perspective about the difference between the US and Australia as well, or the North America and Australasia. The US population and the Canadian population are, considerably more. Even the Canadian population is considerably more than us. 86 educational institutions. Now, some of the language here I'm going to use is Australian-based, but this is not how it's described in the US. So 100% tertiary providers, which we understand to be higher education. In the US, it's called higher education. So 80% offer postgrad programs, 20% offer undergrad programs, and this is library and archives. This is the research I've been doing with my colleague Holly. And 81% offer post-masters certifications. So it's something that's actually offered you can either do it concurrently or after your master's degree to give you extra skills in something that might be coming up, such as data curation or something. So when I talk about postgrad programs, that is masters. So things like our advanced diplomas, the graduate diplomas, they don't exist in the US. So in Australia and New Zealand, slightly less population, 27 educational institutions. Now, as I said, libraries and archives. 59% are TAFE providers. This is primarily our library tech people. Some of those, there is some records management providers in that as well. 44% are tertiary providers. And of the tertiary providers, we have 75% offering postgrad, and that includes those certificates, the one-year certificate and the master's programs, and 50% offer undergrad courses. So one of the primary differences, primarily between the Australasia region and the North American region, is the presence of iSchools. I'm not going to go into that too deeply, but it's significant there, not so significant here. We have one library and archives accredited iSchool, and that's Charles Sturt. The other iSchool that we have in Australia is this institution and the information systems. There is movements from QUT, who used to deliver libraries and archives education, to get rid of they've gotten rid of it, and they want to bring in something that's going to be accredited by the Computer Society, the same as what is accredited here. So more in information systems and information science stuff, data science and that kind of thing. There is library and archive schools are closing down that ECU is teaching out. And we have a little bit of what I think is a little bit of a crisis going on, particularly in archival education. One of the things to mention, so we presented this recently, and this is just the really beginning, 3 months I've been here. I teach about 130 students over actually 4 courses, because I teach Open Universities Australia as well as Curtin. I teach preservation and I teach archives concepts and practices. So some of the recommendations we came up with was records and archives as a meta-discipline. That links to what we were talking about, what the previous presentation was about, related to this interdisciplinary kind of thing. Adaptability in design of education, and that's what I'm probably going to talk about a little bit at the rest of this presentation. One of them, and this is Holly's thing, she wants to review Australian accreditation standards, particularly around libraries. And the thing that I didn't mention actually is that archives programs in the US as part of the library schools or the iSchools is actually accredited under the American Library Association. They have something in their standards about recorded information. So they are accredited, but it's part of the library. And they have a different way of thinking about libraries and archives and special collections and stuff there. And engage with the iSchool community and what that means. So this is, the briefest kinds of things that we've come up with, and we want to talk about that a little bit more. So the first thing that I want to share with you is that I did this research into how the competencies and the guidelines from North America turn into knowledge, right? And I'm going to share with you the outcomes of that, if I can get to it. So, these were just an amalgamation of quite a lot of data that I extracted from the, as I said, the American Society of American Archivists, actually the Canadian guidelines as well as those AMA and other certified archivist competencies based on their exams, right? So I've added this column about what I've added in there because I felt it was missing. So some of the things that when I was building this list, I'll just go through it slowly, there's quite a lot there, right? So when I was building this list is how kind of generic and specific it is at the same time. So how, as an educator, I might educate archival students is really not easy to get from this list, right? Now, definitely the competencies from those certified bodies or the certification bodies was a little bit easier, but even still some really hard things to try and understand. My favourite thing from this is organisational theory. So whenever I tell this story, I'm telling people, so, you know, I've got all these guidelines and stuff, but on the guidelines it says organisational theory. I'm like, what organisational theory would you like me to teach? All of it? Historical organisational theory? Current? What do I teach? So one of the problems that I found in the US was that when I was developing archival education, and I came to realise there's a bit of a culture around this too, is that you develop because you're an expert and you do what you want, basically. And it can be accredited by the ALA, and generally people ignore the guidelines. So, but I'm the expert, I'm building into it, and it's the student responses to it that's most important. Now, the other thing that exists that's different there compared to here is that in those master's programs, they have a core amount, try to make it as small as possible, of topics or subjects. We call them courses in the States, everyone calls them units here, to do before you can specialise. And we have specialisation streams. And it was my job when I went to Kent State to build the specialisation stream for archives. First thing I did was change the foundations unit. The next thing I did was build an archives appraisal unit. The next thing that I was about to do was build a community archives unit because I could do whatever I wanted to do because I was the expert that came in. That's a really great model, but at the same time, and part of the reason why the model is great is because it creates an individualised experience, and people will go to that school because of that individualised experience. And when that was established in more papers that I wrote and that kind of thing, people would likely come because I was teaching a particular kind of thing. I wanted to do something on personal record keeping and that kind of topics that I'm particularly interested in. Whereas here we have a much more standardised, streamlined model. And in Australia, we all know that we love standards, and we put them in place. So we have this graduate certificate for postgraduate certificate, where people can do 1 year and they do the core kinds of learnings, and then they do a couple of units on archives and records management, usually, right? And so my experience at Monash, I did the graduate certificate and then decided to do the master's. So I'm an accredited librarian as well as archives and records manager because I did the master's. But in the beginning with just the records, which is what I started with, I did 2 units that were my specialisation. Whereas in the States, you could do 6, that was your specialisation. And 15 weeks on appraisal, you learn a whole lot more about appraisal than you do in the 2 weeks that I just presented to my students at Curtin, right? Okay, but that is not the primary thing that I want to talk about. Let me get back to here. This is currently what I teach, right? This is what I learned when I went to Monash 10 years ago, primarily. This is the same kind of stuff. And then, this is kind of what I taught in the States as well, right? It's all around archival functions. And some of the things that I learned in the States and over the last few years since I finished my PhD is that I don't want to teach archival functions anymore. Because archives, and as I said yesterday in a presentation, archives and record keeping is about people. And one of the things that we're talking about a lot in this conference is that record keeping and archives is about people. So I want the front end of how we teach our archival students to be archivists, to be about people. And I also teach, so one of the other things that's really hard in this new environment for me, when I went to the States, 100% online teaching at Kent State University. Now, when I was at Monash and I was teaching there as well before I left, that was a hybrid kind of version. Really hard. We actually used to design to deliver in class and then kind of adapt for our online students. Not really, kind of. As an online student myself in 2007, I had to listen to 2-hour lectures that were recorded. It was awful. It's an awful experience. So when I started teaching and I did some work on how we design curriculum for online delivery, I started delivering 10-minute lectures, maybe one. And then we would have sessions, live sessions. Some people turn up, some people don't. I have currently, for my Curtin students, I have a live session every week, 2 people turn up. But geez, it's a great conversation. We don't just talk about what they're doing, we talk about how they're synthesising things. So for my conservation preservation class here at Curtin, I have to teach online and in person. I have about 80 students altogether. I have 8 turn up to the in-person class. So I actually design for online delivery, focus on them first, and then I adapt for in-person. And sometimes it doesn't work quite well. I'm still getting there, right? But what I want us to do, so this is the primary argument that I'm trying to present today, is that if we think about how we do work as archivists, thinking about people first, people who create records, people who are documented in records, people who need to access records, people who need to understand how we've created the records in our own archive systems. We need to think about critically what that means. So this is one of the things that I want to tell you about what I've learned while I was in the States. I'm very fortunate to be friends and colleagues with Michelle Caswell and with Ricky Punzalan, I'm going to ask to come up and talk in a little bit. And as well as some other really fabulous, cutting-edge thinkers in archival thinking and education. And so if we think about, actually, there's a big movement, and I'm sure you probably have some awareness of it, around critical archives, around decolonising archives, and I was at a workshop last week about that, and about how we understand the role of archives. In the UK, and Professor Anne Gilliland from UCLA went to, she inspired an entire conference about what do archives do that nothing else does. You know what? That's about people. And so I think we can still include all of those things that we need, like standards and policies and all of that kind of stuff. But if we approach it from the perspective of people, then we're going to think about archival education in a different way. So a couple of the things that I did when I started this in the States was around going to the head of special collections and archives at Kent State University. So I was there for 5 minutes. I call her up, I say, can I get you to do a video? She's like, okay. And then I found out why. Because she hated us. She hated the academics. Because apparently we were developing assignments using archival materials without telling them. So they'd have all these students, this was because they'd only just got rid of the in-person classes. So they were telling all these students to go to the archives and look at the same records and not telling the archivists. Yeah, unhelpful. So I kind of turned her around, and then we started to develop a working group with us. Got the university archivists involved as well. And I said, look, what can I do to get the students to do some work for you in their assignments? And we thought about it, and we had some talking and figuring out what we could do. Because I'd heard about this thing called service learning and flipping the classroom and figuring out how you can get work done, right? Using students and using their work together. So I was building exercises into this online learning and that kind of thing they had to do as a group, had to do individually, and that had some mixed success. But the archivist said to me, the head of special collections said to me, well, you know, our finding aids are all out of date and they're not compliant. And so there was two compliance. There was the DAX compliance and there was the EAD, which has got a new updated version. So I said, what if I get my students to check which ones are and then figure out a project to develop how to make them compliant? And she was like, that'd be great. So we put that in place. And it was fabulous, except I ultimately failed because service learning, which is also, so this is something I got from the States, but it is that work integrated learning that they were talking about before. And it can apply at different levels, right? So I ultimately failed because, does anyone want to hazard a guess? I'm being a teacher now, aren't I? Because I didn't report back. Right, I didn't tell them. I didn't tell her. And you know what? Fair enough, I left the country. But I didn't tell her what was wrong with her finding aids, what the students had developed. I had 3 groups. Each of them developed a project plan. I didn't give it back to her. And it was partly because I was leaving the country, but partly because I hadn't thought it through properly. And I found out since that service learning is really about this 360 feedback loop and ongoing development. So of course I've been here 5 seconds. I've already spoken to the special collections and archives at Curtin and promoting similar kinds of things. They're a little less hesitant. Well, they're a little hesitant at the moment. So this is going to be a long conversation. But one of the things that I was thinking about in relation to service learning and what I heard at a conference in the States was, why can't my students go out and talk to artists or work with community organisations? Or what if we do an assignment around building an app for a collection, building a collection? What does that mean? Because then they're going to start to learn about some of the issues. So it's not just go out, do it. I'm still here. I'll mentor them in all of these, the functions. But we do it in a different way and we engage with people in a different way because it's about people, right? So that's kind of what I wanted to sort of promote. Now, the last thing I wanted to share with you, and I'm going to ask my friend and colleague, Dr. Ricky Punzalan, to come and up here to talk about, is that poster that was talked about, that was delivered at the ASA-ITIC conference in July this year. And it's about one of these ways we can start to think about people first and dismantling some of the ideas that might exist. I'm going to bring it up for you. Now, I want you to remember that this is actually a poster from the US. Last week I was at this workshop with some Noongar elders from Southwest Western Australia. They loved it. And we started a huge discussion about archival literacies. Now, archival literacies is what the guys were talking about essentially this morning in the previous thing. So how can I build this understanding of archival literacies, sometimes to students who've never been in an archive but want to be archivists? You know, how can I do that? So what I'm trying to do, and one of the things about this, Ricky, can you come up? Is that it does have the archival functions, right? But I wanted Ricky to tell you a little bit about, there's a microphone around here somewhere, a little bit about this poster and why it exists and how it was used, yeah. Because you talked about it at the conference.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello. This is actually developed in a class by Michelle Caswell at UCLA called Archives, Records, and Memory. And together with her students, they developed this poster, basically listing in the U.S., I don't know if you discuss it here. We like to talk about white privilege, and the kinds of privilege that could be embedded in our institutions, and in this case, archival institution, and they broken it down into different functions of archives and what could be the embedded and inherent white privilege that are in there. The assumption is that archival institutions were primarily a white dominated institution from the very inception and creation, and because that's the history of archival repositories in the US, those systems of values are embedded in the systems. So what they did as a class is to look at those different functions, is how it might be privileging the white folks in society, but not the minority groups. And they came up with a list of privilege and then a proposed action to dismantle that privilege. Now, so when we did this at the Society of American Archivists, what we did was we talked about the different, and this is very U.S. specific, so it's very hard to explain sometimes. Even I'm from the Philippines, and it's very hard to explain it there. But for instance, we had a listing of 50 privileges that are people take for granted, but actually are very insidious for for people of color. For instance, the moment you see me, the first thing that goes in your head is, I will struggle understanding his accent because he's not white and he probably has an accent. Oh, he's Asian, he probably doesn't know English, and that's the assumption, right? And that's a kind of privilege because many white people do not get that assumption in the United States. It's you're automatically assumed that people could communicate with you. So those are the there's a long list of those things, and then we start talking about what might be the equivalent of that in archival repository and in terms of function. And then we created actually our own list at the SAA conference in July. Is that all you want me to?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So I guess the whole point of sharing it with you is that this is something that is disrupting, and it makes us think about things in a different way, right? And so my goal, 3 months having been here, blah, 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 is to think about archival education in a different way. I want to flip it. I want to turn it upside down. I can't actually probably do this in this same way because I don't have people in a classroom. I can't talk about this online when nobody turns up to talk to me. So some of the things that I'm trying to do is figure out who is interested in working with me on developing projects. Now, the way that I see it now is how we can have long-term projects that students can come into at certain points. In our master's program, we have an advanced discipline project, which we usually do for research. I did a research thing. Yes, it turned into a PhD. But what about those students who don't want to do a PhD? What can we do for them? That would be really cool to think about that. And practicums. Practicums are absolutely invaluable. Luckily, our undergraduates get to do 2, but our postgraduates only get to do 1. And I think that kind of work is really useful, and it would complement other kinds of innovation and discovery if we did that as education. Now I'm going to stop talking, and I would really like to hear what people think about it.
And while the mic's going up, there's just a quick question for me. What's an iSchool? I wasn't sure.
Oh, okay. So the iSchool movement it was born from a consortium of large kind of research tier organisations, universities in the States, and it has different levels, but they're information schools. And they're really about that. It's a little I, but it's really about big information science, broadly conceived. And it's a movement that really wants to think about the different aspects of how information can be studied, in our world, I think, broadly. So some of the things that people are grappling with actually in the US around the iSchool movement is this: do we stay accredited by ALA and be library, and they often call it lose the library in our name, or do we affiliate with the iSchool movement more and talk about that broad? So I've heard a little bit of whisperings about that, and we don't have that here. And one of the things about Curtin is that we are the Department of Information Studies, and I'm in a school, a humanities faculty in a school of creative media and communication, and the internet studies people don't want to hang out with us, right? They are not interested in being in any way part of what we do. And Leisa Summers is up there, she'll be able to tell us more about that too. But I went to a conference about it, and I've gone off on a tangent, but so many people in our faculty are doing stuff on archives, it's crazy. And, you know, something's happening at Deakin soon about critical archives, and the person who organised it said she didn't know who the archival scholars were. So there needs to be a lot of, in Australia, there needs to be a lot of more engagement with that. Yes?
Maggie Shapley from ANU Archives. Leisa, thanks for your presentation and thanks for sharing that poster. I've been trying to get a copy of that, so I'm really interested in that poster you've put up. I'm interested in your idea that getting away from this functional approach to archival education. In fact, I'm a little bit worried about that. We take a lot of practicum students, as you know, and one of the things I want them to know is about the functions before they arrive. And so I'm assuming when you're talking about not teaching by function, you actually are going to teach the functions, but you're not going to present it in those blocks. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. So for me, the way that I understand and the way that I was taught, it's about description and explanation. I want first synthesis, or first of all, I want discovery, then explanation, and then synthesis. So, you know, instead of telling people about what is community engagement or what is appraisal, getting to go out and do something about it, and then we synthesise it by talking about it later or by them demonstrating to me through an assessment. And they have to still engage with all the literature and the things that I would normally teach. But so my conservation preservation class, I tell them, do not read the readings before you come in. So this is the in-person people. Don't read them. We're going to do some stuff, we're going to talk about it, then you go away and make sense of it.
Okay, thanks for that, Leisa.
Leisa, as a person who's come to the industry, I guess, partway through their working life, I found the practical component very valuable, and having come out of an industry that doesn't really do anything like this to working in an industry that now does. So when you're revamping your stuff, can you please make sure there's plenty of opportunity for people to get that practical experience? Yeah. Not just the theory, because people want the practical stuff when they turn up to work. They expect you to be able to function, and that's one thing. It's been a challenge.
Yes, it's a great comment too. And so one of the things that I've seen both in the States and here is that this idea that when you come to school you learn theory, and then you go into the workforce and you learn the reality, and you've put theory behind. So one of the things that I want to do with this kind of way of approaching is to bring technical and practical aspects in building things and discovering through building. So then when you go out and you reflect on them and you critically reflect on them, then you go out into the workforce, you're still building theory. Because we are missing at the moment that archives is built on theory by practitioners, and we seem to be going down a path where practitioners are rejecting theory. And I want that to come back into it. So how we always continuously build theory.
Thanks for that, Leisa. And I certainly like the idea of focusing in on people and then moving out to functions. One of the problems that I think you'll face is the expansion of things in that approach. And to give you, obviously in my approach there's always some sort of philosophical thing, but it is the John Barth thing, that we've got to get the past off our backs and under our belts. and that there is a lot of past which is going into the sort of structures that we've got in Australia, much of which is pressing on our backs rather than being something that we understand why it's there. And to give you a quick idea, I started at Monash in 1989 and set up a master's program on the American model. The economics was such that I then had to try and seek money for a graduate diploma, and I recruited Sue in and hoped to go fishing, but I enjoyed working with Sue so much I stayed. Sue introduced the graduate diploma. Then economic pressures forced us to do undergraduate stuff, and so you get this layering of stuff over time. We started out, accreditation was important to what we were doing because people were employing people from courses. But that's always been dicey in the archival area. I was an historian, went into archives, we imported people from many positions, and I'm not saying that's a bad model. So you had this employer problem. So then we started to go into research and PhDs, of which you're a product, and so you get this layering of things. And things are now expanding into that IT type area. So my question is basically, from this person-based approach, how can you coherently cover this expansion of what we need to do through into GLAM and the stuff we were talking about before? So have you thought through or thought ahead of how that's going to happen?
Well, I'm currently about a week behind in marking.
Right.
So, no, I have, and I think about different ways that we could approach it, but I haven't kind of, this certainly the way that I teach archives is not going to change until I can test some things out. I have some paper coming out soon, and it's in a heritage journal related to how we might teach critical reflexivity. And I'm going to test it out. I'm just going to keep testing some things out. This is not something I can implement now. But one of the things that, you know, from my research that was really important is about how people interact with technologies is something that we need to consider when we're thinking about archives and record keeping. And memory making as a process. And so I don't know the answer completely, but it is really high on my mind. And I think some of the interdisciplinary stuff is what we need to do. I had an idea to, you know, get people together. UX was huge in my school in Kent State. I was talking to somebody, let's get some things together, get some things happening. They have different models for paying people there. I'm not sure if I can do this here at Curtin, but for paying for summer instruction and stuff. So we were going to create these kinds of projects. I was going to do a digitisation project. They had a digital lab there. All of these were students who were coming in and self-directing their learning and discovering things on the way. But I haven't, I don't know how it's going to go. But yes, thank you, Frank. It's going to be on my mind.
And one quick final question for lunch.
Hi, it's Fiona from the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies. I have a question for you or Ricky about the identifying and dismantling white supremacy in archives. And it's about whether when your schedule, whatever you call poster was developed, how much you were able to address, do you think, the power of the institution to continue colonisation? Because the ASA-ITIC protocols, which were developed here over 20 years ago, which were developed by a combination of Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal library and other information workers, is focused very much on what individual actions that staff can take in terms of engagement, but it didn't necessarily talk about the kind of things that you're talking about, how white supremacy is built into, is fundamental to the structures of the institution. And I think that the fact, and the, I'm taking a bit of a long time, but I'm trying to give you why I'm interested, because one of the things that institutions do is infect, if you like, the thinking of the people who work in them. For example, as I said, the ASA-ITIC protocols focused on what individuals can do instead of how to transform our organisation. At the moment, IATSIS is developing a policy on the use of racialised language in description. We've talked to a lot of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from a range of situations, institutions in the community and care leaving organisations, and there is a really clear divide between what people have to say depending on whether they work for an institution or not. If they work, for instance, in IATSIS, there's a huge reluctance among Indigenous people to change language, where people who work with the community or further out in the community think changing language is very important. And I think that the weight of the institution and its colonising effect is really real. So I'm just interested to see how you dealt with that in the development of that, or its application to address that.
So probably Ricky would be good to talk to the poster.
This is a relatively new poster that's happening in campuses in the teaching of archives, and also I'll be implementing this in Maryland soon with the staff of the library and the university archives and special collections. So in terms of impact, whether it's changing the institution, that remains to be seen. What's happening is we are advocating this type of conversations. That said, I wouldn't say that this is widely adopted. We receive a lot of backlash on this. Our own colleagues sometimes, saying that the impossibility of this task. So maybe in 5 years' time I could report back, but right now, just like in the spirit of what Vern was saying, having these spaces where we have conversations. Another thing that we are trying to avoid is there's a lot of, at least in the United States, what we call white fragility and white guilt. Like when you talk about this, people start crying, people start feeling defensive because they think that you are accusing them of something that they don't think they are doing. And so it begins with, talking about, no, this is about our orientation and our collective contributions. But yeah, the changing the institutions is very difficult. And in the first place, at least in the US, sometimes the conversation is about black and white. Those who are in between, like Asians and Native Americans, are in between and sometimes not even acknowledged. So it's a very complex conversation that, again, going back to this poster, is highly basically implemented and inspired by academics and students. So we will see.
Thanks.
I just want to say one last thing, and this kind of brought it home to me last week in that workshop that I was involved in creating, and Vern came to the workshop on decolonising the archive, and we were really focusing on the State Archive, and there was one person in the room who said, I'm an archivist, I know the solutions, there's solutions out there, let's get it done. And another person in the room who was a young Noongar woman who said, this work will take longer than my lifetime. So some of those conversations is what I'm hoping that we can bring to this kind of disruption. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks. And thanks again to Leisa.